We have a few more people trickling in, but in the meantime, let's make a start. So I begin today by acknowledging the Ghana people, traditional custodians of the land that I am joining you from today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Welcome to today's webinar, the first in our highly anticipated Thought Leadership series. Today we'll be discussing and presenting ideas on research impact. Next slide, please. I'm just moving on to the next slide. Thank you. My name is Lucy Cook and I am the Academic Partnerships Manager at Epigeum. Epigeum is a leading provider of online training courses supporting the needs of higher education institutions in three core areas: research, support and well-being, and studying. Next slide, please. Today we'll be thinking about research impact. I'm pleased to welcome our four speakers. Prestigious presenters, Dr Tamika Heiden, Julie Ward, Dr Faith Welch, and Lia Sherwood. We'll hear from our guests shortly, but just a quick housekeeping message before we start. Next slide, please. So we have a Q&A box and chat function to the side, so please write any questions that you have throughout for our speakers, and we'll try to answer these towards the later part of our session. The webinar is also being recorded and we will share the recording shortly after the event. Now the housekeeping is complete, I will pass over to our first speaker, Dr. Tamika Heiden, to present. Thanks, Tamika.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Great to see so many people joining online. So first of all, I just thought I would give you a little bit of background and some context around where I'm coming from with my comments today. So I am the director of the Research Impact Academy, and we have existed since 2014, if you can believe it, so coming up to 10 years. And in that time, I've worked with thousands of researchers all across different disciplines in impact, and basically through training, through consulting, through helping with writing their grants, also worked with research funders, thinking about how they can put impact into their grants, how they can peer review that, how they can even fund that, although not too many people listen to me on that one, so that's a whole other topic, and doing a lot of impact evaluation work for government agencies, because now we know that when it comes to impact, everyone cares about the return on investment. So if we can jump to the next slide, and what I want to do is really just talk about the challenges and opportunities. So I thought, there are heaps of them, right? There's so many challenges. And so what I wanted to do is just group them together. So the first one I'm going to talk about are the drivers. And the drivers are really a challenge because we don't have sometimes those reward mechanisms that we need in order to drive this. So, you know, that carrot and stick scenario. So we have limited reward mechanisms. What we need to do is we need to be better, though, I believe, at highlighting what we already have as an impact agenda. And I'm going to say that in inverted commas because people don't like that term agenda. But, you know, I think we have to be better at highlighting that impact is here. People need to understand impact. It's in all of the grants now. If you are not writing about impact, if you haven't planned an impact, if you haven't had an impact in the past, then you are not able to write a grant proposal. So for anyone who says, oh, we don't need to do impact, regardless of the type of research they're doing, the discipline area, whether they're fundamental, whether they're applied, it's everywhere now. It's just sometimes not obvious. We're also, you know, in terms of national assessment, we're sort of in limbo at the moment around that, and that would be a really obvious driver because a national assessment is pretty obvious, although I think in Australia our baby-sized assessments probably aren't too much of an agenda driver at this point, although they do take up a lot of time and they cost a lot of money. And I also think that we just have a bit too much talk and not enough action. So as an example, we have, you know, chief scientists who write papers and come out and make speeches. But if you really look at what they're saying and you look back a couple of different chief scientists ago, we've got the same thing said, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. So really, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of talk, but I think, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of action, and I think it's because research has probably become a bit too political, or research impact in that regard. Next point, please. So the next thing that is a challenge is our expertise. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I won't do that. So in terms of peer review, in particular, I've seen this as an issue. So when assessments do get introduced, for example, in grant proposals or national assessments, we need to consider peer review. It's not the easiest thing to understand impact. And so I think it's a real challenge that we introduce things really hastily, but we probably don't put in place the pieces that are going to be really valuable in order to make sure that the effort that goes into writing case studies and writing grants is being rewarded fairly. So we need to build some capability of the sector. We need to think about capability both at the research support level and the researcher level itself. There's too many competing views. There's a lot of mixed information around impact. I see it all the time where I'm working with people, and then internally someone will say something else. So I think that, you know, we need a bit more of a conversation about this, and a lot of conversation to stop the confusion, because people are just getting frustrated about it because everyone's got a different answer. And well, peer review, I'm not going to get into any deeper, but if anyone wants to ask me about that, that could be like a week on its own. Next point, the final challenge I wanted to just bring up is time. We need to appreciate that impact takes time. People don't have a lot of time. If you want to become someone's best friend, save them time, save them money. It takes a long time to build the relationships. We have to ensure the relevance of the research. We've got to nurture the relationships. We've got to get the buy-in. We've got to deliver the meaningful results. And this all takes time. And if we're going to then, on top of that, influence the adoption and the uptake of the research findings that's going to be sustainable and scalable, that's going to take more time. And the time doesn't get funded, it doesn't get rewarded, but I think it really is an opportunity. So the opportunity is that we could better fund these activities. We could have more wider and more inclusive discussions on impact from people that work in the sector or that understand impact. We could have changes to those funding structures. And perhaps if we do think about a national assessment and we're thinking about case studies, then maybe we could do them so we could use them to promote the relevance of research and get more investment back into research, increase our funding of research, increase those opportunities. They're my challenges. Thanks, I'll pass on.
Thank you, Tamika. That was such an insightful presentation. Now I'd like to pass over to our next presenter, Julie Ward.
Hi everyone, my name is Julie Ward. I'm the Research Impact Coordinator at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. I just wanted to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the Gubbi Gubbi Nations, where our main campus is located. We pay our respects to the ancestors, elders and descendants of these lands and acknowledge that these have always been places of learning. Okay, so I just wanted to start today with a small overview of the University of the Sunshine Coast. We are a regional university in Queensland. We're about 100 kilometres north of Brisbane. And as you can see with some of our high-level facts and figures there, we've got 5 campuses along the coast, and we have a very heavy teaching focus to support the regional aspect of the university. A small number of our staff are research only relative to other bigger universities in Australia. We can skip on to the next slide, please. The challenges that UniSC faces in relation to research impact, I think, are also ones that present as opportunities for improvement. The first one I wanted to touch upon is culture. That is a huge one for us here at the University of the Sunshine Coast. And maybe even a step before that is just defining what is impact and why it is important. That's something that we really struggle with within our research cohort, is why are we even talking about it? Why do we need it? Why does any of this actually exist? So we're trying to address this through a series of educational and professional development opportunities for researchers. We also try and highlight impact during other grant presentations and seminars that the Office of Research does throughout the year. The big challenge I find is that the wider culture piece needs buy-in from senior staff and leadership, and they need to see the value in the impact reporting and evidencing. And just as an example, currently impact reporting or impact in general is not part of our promotion scheme or our annual review for academic staff at UniSC. So that's a big hurdle within itself to overcome. And sadly, this may not change until the push comes from government, as Tamika's already highlighted, in the form of a required government assessment within Australia. So the education plan that we have implemented over the last 2 years, it focuses on a series of workshops presented by an external consultant. So one is about retrospectively looking at the impact of your existing research and giving staff the tools and the framework for writing an impact case study. And this has been really targeted and the approach has been set up for senior staff within the university. The second workshop that we've held is really around our early to mid-career group, plus our higher degree research students. So this workshop looks at the basic level of what is impact and getting that learning out there, and also how to plan for your impact pathway. So they're trying to embed those fundamental skills within that junior research cohort. And so my last challenge is something that has taken a lot of my time recently. Our IT system, well, we don't currently have one, so it's not really one I can talk of. It's more of a wish list. We don't have a dedicated impact repository or a module that sits within our research management system. So we don't have anything for evidence collection at this point, or even planning your impact along that pathway that I mentioned earlier. So we're currently exploring different options with several different vendors, and we're also looking in-house at what we can use within internal systems that we already have, given budget frameworks within Australian universities at the moment. So it is anticipated that once we do have an IT system or something in place, we will roll out more of an education suite, and hopefully that will tackle the first, so it's all, cyclical, it'll come back and tackle that first point of culture. The one positive that I can relay is that we are looking at implementing an institutional license for Overton. And for those of you that don't or aren't aware of Overton, it's a policy database. I really recommend you going to have a look at that, and we can talk more about that later. And we will obviously work in some sort of impact education when we roll out that training for Overton early next year. So we're very much at the beginning of the journey of starting a new culture of impact reporting, of what impact is and how to collate your evidence. So we're very much at that first point for a university, trying to stay ahead of before a policy rolls out, but that's where the University of the Sunshine Coast is up to. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. That was brilliant. Just a reminder before we hear from Faith, so if you've got any questions, you can put them into the Q&A and we can put them to the presenters later on. So now on to our next speaker, Dr. Faith Welch.
Kia ora koutou, ko Faith Welch, toka wingoa. I'm Faith Welch, Associate Director of Research Strategy, Policy and Development at Waipapa Taumatoro, which is the University of Auckland. I was actually the university's Research Impact Manager for the last 6 years, and I've worked in research impact in various forms in the UK and New Zealand for around 12 years, which I believe is why I'm here today. If we go to the next slide. So I just wanted to give some context about what has shaped research impact in Aotearoa, New Zealand over recent years. The Ministry of Business and Innovation and Employment, they are kind of our funders of our research, science and innovation system here in New Zealand. They released a series of discussion papers kind of in the late 2010s. And back in 2019, they actually came up with their own definition of what research impact is. Very familiar looking definition. I don't think it's going to particularly surprise anyone. It's that change to the economy, society, or environment beyond contribution to knowledge and skills in research organisations. But it was the very first time that they kind of said, this is our definition. We're going to think about how we support the system to enable impact to occur. Since then, kind of what's shaping our national context right now is Te Ara Paerangi, which is a once-in-a-generation research, science and innovation system reform. So they kind of said, let's just start from scratch, essentially, like what needs to change. They released a white paper at the end of last year, and there were some really strong policy signals in there, which one of them was particularly around the need to accelerate innovation, diversify and scale up impact, which I found really interesting because it kind of signalled support for broader impact pathways beyond commercialisation. There's also a view to determine some national research priorities, which are being framed as essentially as impact goals. So they're really clear policy-driven missions aimed at achieving tangible results. And how that is going to go is going to be really interesting. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my challenges and opportunities at the end. If we go to the next slide. So this brings us to Waipapa Tō Mataro and how we support our researchers to have impact. We've always based all of our support and strategy on the following ethos, and I think this kind of cartoon shows that really nicely. It says, as a change agent, you can't make change happen, but you can create an environment that increases the odds. And we kind of position it to our researchers as, you know, we may have little or no control over the impact of our research, but what we're trying to do is create an environment that increases the odds of impact occurring. Next slide. So since 2018, we've been really focusing on how we create an environment within the institution for impact to thrive. We actually developed our own definition of what impact was, because back then there was no national definition of what research impact was, and our researchers kind of really wanted to own that piece. And again, although it's of no surprise, we did tweak it to kind of more traditional definitions for it to be more inclusive to our research base, where we have a lot of researchers who work in that creative practice space. We really focused, we kind of released our research impact and engagement strategy at the same time, and really focused on everything that would create that environment for our researchers to be empowered or supported in achieving impact. So really focusing on developing training, tools, resources, changing and looking at all of our policies and processes and seeing how they're enabling impact to occur, looking at our reward and recognition mechanisms, all that kind of stuff. And this really has been further supported by the new university strategy, Tō Mata, which came in 2020, which has a really strong focus on enabling relevant, purposeful, impactful research for our communities. I've also just included a picture of our research hub, which is kind of the gateway to all of our internal research support, training, guides. A lot of it is just linking to best practice that's already out there. But yeah, there's a huge wealth of resources, and I believe actually this is available externally. So please, if you just, I'm pretty sure if you just type into the internet, if you just type in University of Auckland research impact, I'm pretty sure this comes up. So do have a look. Last slide. So I just picked 3 challenges and opportunities, and I wasn't actually going to talk to them about them too much in case we kind of got more into them. For us, the really big thing that happened this week is we finally have a new government after a month or so of waiting. We also have a new minister. There is a lot of uncertainty in the research sector at the moment, and particularly surrounding those Te Ara Paerangi research sector reforms. We don't know what impact means to the new minister. The priorities of investment are likely to change from what they would have been under the previous government. And as I said, a lot of these major investments, these national research priorities, are framed around impact goals, and that's where a lot of the funding for impact is going to be going. There are network processes that are going to be underpinning all of these huge pieces of investment. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time, but I like how Julie was so positive and saw it as an opportunity. So, you know, we've got an opportunity to do something new here. The next one is I want to mention our PBRF, Performance-Based Research Fund. This is our kind of version of excellence in research for Australia, or the UK's Research Excellence Framework. There was a recent review of the PBRF, and they introduced optional assessment of impact engagement, or kind of slightly elevated the optional assessment of impact engagement. So this isn't to the same extent of there being, you know, mandatory requirement for a certain number of impact case studies, but it does pose a new way of doing things. And actually, I see it as a really inclusive way for our researchers to spend a significant amount of their time on building mutually beneficial relationships, rather than just the traditional research activities, and who have really had deep impact for their communities, and allowing that to be celebrated alongside more traditional research output. So I kind of see it as quite an exciting move. And the third thing I want to mention was the Aotearoa Research Impact Community of Practice. Now, I really see a huge value in networks. I actually know all the speakers here from involvement in the Australasian Research Management Society's Research Impact Network. So, you know, networks are amazing things, and they quite often tend to be kind of quite organic. This network has been a long time in development. So our Crown Research Institutes in New Zealand, they've had a kind of a network of impact leads for around 10 years. I was the first research impact manager in one of the universities in New Zealand. So I found this group, and they were very welcoming. I managed to infiltrate their group. And in recent years, this has really kind of informally grown. They're amazing at like developing those relationships and linking people in. We actually finally had our first in-person meeting of this new entity. And it's been amazing because there was so much energy. We felt like there was so much opportunity to make change. We had members of MB's Te Ara Paerangi team there who were there listening. They really wanted to understand how they could better support impact for New Zealand. And so, you know, we feel like we've got an opportunity to influence the direction here. So I think that's an amazing opportunity. And if anyone's in New Zealand or want to join that group, they can. That's me.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Faith. It's great to hear about that really supportive network. I hope that other people from other countries can also find their networks. So now, but by no means least, it's time for Lia Sherwood to present. Over to you, Lia.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, good day to everyone that's listening in. I'd firstly like to acknowledge country and the Five Islands Dreaming, from which I am presenting to you here today, and also pay my respects to any First Nations people emerging, past and present. So this is just, I guess, a quick statistic of what UOW is, where Wollongong is, and how diverse our campuses are, and the breadth, I guess, of where the research takes place. And that's really to, I guess, foreshadow that in this talk, impact is about, as Faith mentioned, the connections that you build and maintain, and those relationships that you can establish, and also the diversity of perspectives that can influence where your research might go. So when we talk about impact at UOW, we also, like Faith mentioned, have our own definition, because as we all know, grant funders, governments, have different definitions of what impact means to them. Everyone has their own impact agenda. And so it's really important, I guess, to be aware of who you're talking to and what you're talking about for your particular audience. And so when I talk about Wollongong, you know, it depends even which campus I'm talking at as to when I'm having those conversations about impact, how I kind of tailor the content to those groups. You could probably go to the next slide. That was just to give you a taste of what Wollongong's about. In terms of drivers, as Tamika mentioned, there's so many different drivers. It's a very complex place to navigate, and I tend to categorize my influencers and drivers by mega influencers, meso and micro. So there's obviously global influencers. Impact assessment is all around the globe now. It's not just in English speaking countries, or primarily, and there's national, state, and institutional. This is where I go into that kind of meso level, that they're all different priorities, and Tamika mentioned it as well. You know, it's funny how you reread something from 10 years ago or 20 years or 15 years ago, and it's still very relevant and still being repeated here today, you know, as being the most pressing and urgent issue that we need to address. It's just as complicated. But I guess jumping over to the opportunities is that globalization does make it easier for us to find the diversity that we need to create, to have creative solutions to really complicated problems. I think we need to kind of, you know, and this is within our locus of control if we're talking about research managers in terms of the challenges. You know, with research management, we know what it's like. There's deadlines every second day. Workload is never ending and the cycle keeps going around. You're feeling under-resourced all the time. So that time taken that's needed to really plan for and get institutional impact embedded as business as usual is a real challenge. And how do you overcome that? I think, you know, if we had the answer to that, we probably wouldn't need to be talking here today. We'd all be, you know, swimming nicely somewhere on a beach. Really, it's the conversations. It comes down to those relationships and those networks that you're able to create, you know, really greasing those wheels to make your life and everyone's life easier. What do they need? Make it reciprocal. What helps you as well? You know, really thinking about the double edge that you can work with a win-win situation. And really key to that is communication. I know, and data, that goes back to Julie's point, having efficient systems. Something as simple as that within our institutions seems to be quite challenging, and really think about areas where you can access data, or data is already created and you can just add another data field if it's a modifiable or configurable database that you're using. We did that at Wollongong for SDGs. We have a research proposal clearance form for all grant applications. So this is pre-award. We put in an SDG field in that so that we could track at least where people are hoping to gain funding and link that to an SDG. That creates, when the grant is successful, obviously that will go into some public database, which then gets tagged using some database provider's tagging system and comes back into our system. So we can see what we're kind of planning for and what we're actually being successful in. You might also do that in-house, but just thinking, I guess, a little bit wider about where your data collection points are already and what's within your locus of control. Who are those people you need to talk to? Who are those relationships that you need to maintain? Yeah, what else did I want to talk about? I guess we do have a framework at UAW, and it's a framework that I think you can apply to almost any problem. It's basically answering the who, why, what, how. So if you have a problem, go through those 4 questions and have conversations to address each of those questions. Once you do that, and also think about detractors. We always hear about that, but it is important on that impact journey is to really think about the gaps and people that might even create barriers. So why do those barriers exist? Is it within your locus of control? And I really think something that universities here in Australia really need to get better at is this global south. I mean, I think Australia, I saw today Jason Clare made a media announcement about the ARC and removing the ability of ministers to veto grants, which is great. The depoliticisation of grant awards is fantastic. And I think he also said something about diversity, that Australia produces, we only have like 0.3% of the world's population, but we produce 3%. So 0.3 we are, and we produce 3% of the global output. So we actually have and I think the reason why we're such great creators of information is the diversity of our population. Australia is really well positioned in that way, and I think we have a lot of diverse perspectives. I think we can get better at incorporating the Global South. Much like Overton, what Julie mentioned, they have a policy that does translation of all of their policy documents. And so it tries to be agnostic for privileged and less privileged countries. So I would just like to, I guess, get you thinking about how you can just diversify your teams, your perspectives, and incorporate that into your impact solutions for your organisations.
Thanks. That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Lia. So we had so many thought-provoking topics that the presentations have brought up. So I'm going to move on to the Q&A. And while I ask the first few questions that have been sent through in advance of the webinar, if you've got any questions, please do put them into the Q&A and we'll get to them if we can. So please do put those in. So I have a few questions that were asked in advance. So the first one comes from Catherine McElhone from the University of Technology, Sydney. And she has asked, apart from blended workshops, do you have any suggestions to increase engagement with a self-driven research impact resource? So I think she's thinking about the Epigeum program here, but any kind of training. And she'd love examples from your institutional consultancy. So I guess this is about how can you increase engagement in general, or increase engagement with training packages or things that might already exist. Anybody like to take that question to start with? Or shall I pick randomly? Faith?
I was going to say, I'm happy to go. Hi, Catherine. Yeah, so we have our own internal training options, and what we've really tried to do at Auckland is ensure that we have training opportunities in different mediums. So we have like so if I take, for example, our kind of like impact planning workshops, we have it as a 1-hour webinar. We record that webinar so people can either come live and talk to us, or they can just watch it in their own time. We do the same webinar, but as actually a workshop, which takes 2.5 hours, which we require people to do it in person, which actually we always sell out when we run that. So that's really, really awesome. And then we also have it available as an online module. And although we don't actually have ability to see how many people are doing that online module, just because the tool that we use, we do find that we have really consistent good uptake across all the different mediums, because we're enabling our researchers to do it in the way that works for them. We know that they're really time poor, and we know different things work for different people. So we're always just trying to make sure that it's as accessible as possible.
Thanks, Faith. That's really helpful. Anyone else like to add anything from their experience that will, increase engagement?
Yeah.
Tamika?
Sure. So this is a really interesting question. It's something that we get asked a lot. And it's because really, build it and they will come is not an answer. As everyone here knows, we don't often have the drivers in New Zealand or Australia to make the researchers want to do this, and as much as we know it's a good thing to do, it can be really tricky. So I think it's really back to basics, and it's something that probably, I don't want to speak poorly of any organisation, so I apologise, but it's a sales and marketing issue. And so really what it is, from my perspective, is can internally, as a unit, even if it's just you on your own, can you come up with a way of how you pitch, how you sell or market your service, which is your workshop, your tools that you're providing, to your clients, which are the researchers? And so what's in it for them? Why would they do this? And I think it's something that probably hasn't been thought of in that way from a research organisation perspective, is how do you make yourself a little business, maybe even a sole trader? I'm thinking of like Julie probably in her role. How do you make yourself kind of a bit of a sole trader and promote your services in order to get your customers to buy into it, if you like. And it's definitely something I've been thinking about a lot, because it's it's part of what we do in our training.
Can I just add to that? I was just going to say that's a really interesting point you made, Tamika, because we did actually slightly change the way that we advertised our workshops. So a lot of them are usually in line with funding rounds, but we started telling people about the increased success rates if they'd engaged in impact training. And I hadn't really considered it as being like that. Of course it is. And of course it's marketing, we're like, yeah. And if you do our training, your success rates increases by, it's not just because they've had impact support. There's proactive people are going out for a variety of support, but yeah.
Another approach, if I can throw in, for our senior staff workshop that we held, we actually took the sort of specialty approach, and we made sure that it came as an invitation from the DVCR at the time, so that it was like, you have been requested, this is really important, and it showed the attendee rate was quite good. I think we had over 90% attendance at that, which was excellent. And the other thing that we do, our centres and institutes so our research centres and institutes within the university, they have an annual report that they have to do each year. And we've inbuilt into that report, so not only just their stats on grants and publications and the usual things that they report on, we've started over the last 2 years to embed 3 impact case studies. And so they've had one-on-one training, so they've gotten just that little bit more. And it's just another way of starting to build our database of case studies, so that we are ready if the national assessment does come to be.
I just wanted to give UOW's perspective quickly as well for engagement. Similar to Julie, it's a one-man, one-woman band that's driving a lot of the impact. So establishing your value to others who also see the faculty members at schools. We do that through the library. So we have a really close relationship with the library, and we also have faculty research teams that kind of advocate for engagement with the impact, need that we're asking researchers to address. We also have training, and that's kind of going towards Faith's point about having different ways that people can access that training and different forums and platforms. So we have an intranet site. We have, as part of the APF, the Academic Performance Framework, impact is actually in that policy, and there's an impact catalogue which gives examples of what that could look like in your promotion or probation discussion. So we kind of try and give them all the resources and tools and the training that we can, and then the way that we disseminate that is through our networks across other professional staff. And if we used to have like a governance group, which was built from academic staff. They would be our impact champions, but at the moment times are tough and workloads are stretched, so we haven't been able to kind of lean on them so much. But it's really working on those relationships and trying to get buy-in from the bottom up and top down and sideways in.
Thanks, Lia. Thanks, everyone. It's so interesting to hear all the different approaches, and the need for kind of promotion and networks just comes out. And Lia, the difference between Wollongong having that written into your professional development and Julie, not quite yet. So lots of different drivers and lots of different networks. Thanks so much. That's really interesting. So the next question that I've got is from Anne-Marie McLaren from the University of Notre Dame. She asks, what is your advice on achieving research impact in humanities fields? So anybody like to start off on that one?
I'm happy to go again.
Thanks, Faith.
No, so yeah, I find this area really interesting because I've got a STEM background, and when I first started in kind of research impact, I worked for a funder in biotechnology, and then I worked at the University of Bristol in science and engineering. So, when I moved to the University of Auckland, it was the first time I had that really broad, like similar to Lia and Julie, it was until recently it was just me for the whole institution. So, you know, we started getting researchers from the arts and humanities asking you, how does this apply to me? And actually it's just, I think it's really fascinating. So one thing that I two things. All research has the ability to have impact in some way or another. So that's kind of always where we start from. If you're not sure what impact might look like in your field, I always recommend researchers go and look at, for example, the UK REF Impact Case Study Database. I had to give a workshop with the School of Music just a couple of months ago. And you know, it's not something that immediately comes to mind as what the impact of music research is going to have. But you go to this database and you can see all the different kinds of ways in which researchers in this field have impact, who they're engaging with, what their impact pathways look like, how they might have evidenced that impact. It's an amazing resource to understand what impact might look like in disciplines that you don't work in quite so often. So that's kind of how I've built up my knowledge over the last however long, you know, if I'm not sure what it looked like. However, I will say that the principles in which we teach people to think about what the impact of their research might be and how to build it into their research is the same. There's no different, it doesn't, I might use slightly different language, but the same process works for someone in engineering as it would work for someone in kind of a more creative discipline. So
I'd just like to jump in as well to say that just because it's in humanities doesn't mean that you can't have a diverse team where a creative artist is part of a health outcome. You know, so there's actually benefits in mixing different disciplines and thinking about different outcomes that can occur. So the approach, even the mixed methods approach that might be used in the creative arts, or, you know, like just using it as a melting pot for those discussions. I think we should try and not think so siloed about our approach. The REF is like, yeah, definitely great resource. Look at the feedback that the panels have had on the different, you know, panels. Like, it's just incredible. So yeah, that's a good hot tip.
Thanks so much, Faith and Lia. Anyone else want to add anything about humanities and showing the impact? Tamika?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is that you, like Faith and Lia have both said, I mean, you're still going to have an impact and the principles are the same. I think the thing that's going to really differ is probably the way in which you are translating or sharing your knowledge. So it's in a more artistic way, a more descriptive way. You're not going to probably have the metrics-based type approach. It's probably not going to be a product sort of thing, etc., although sometimes it can be. But I think you know, the impact opportunity is absolutely the same. It's really just the avenue to get there. And as Faith clearly said, it's really just the words that can change and how we describe some things.
Right, thanks, Tamika. Julie, you've got also something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, I know I briefly touched on Overton earlier, but I just wanted to give an example. One of our Associate Deans of Research currently had to review all the staff that sit under her in the School of Creative Arts and Business. And she actually got in touch with me to do Overton reports on all of her staff. And that was, her words, it was a big wake-up call for a lot of her staff. They weren't even aware that they were cited in some of these policy documents. So there's an impact they've already had that they didn't even know that they were having. So just be aware of new tools, new opportunities to find all these different metrics. They don't have to be the usual pubs and grants and citations and things like that. There are other opportunities of reporting your impact.
That's really interesting. Thanks so much for raising that one. Probably going to get a lot of hits, people finding out more about Overton. I've got another question here. It's quite general. I think you may have answered it also, but it's from Rebecca Jones from the University of Oxford. And Rebecca, if you want to add more to this question, please do add it into the Q&A. And anyone else who's got a question, please do add them in the Q&A. Her question was simply, why does research impact matter? So you did mention this, but was there anything else that you wanted to add in terms of different stakeholders that might not have been mentioned so far, or yeah, anyone?
I just think it matters, and I don't just say this because I have a business around it, but it matters because if you go back to the very beginning and you ask yourself, why do you do anything you do? And it's for a result. But how will you know you had the result if you don't actually look for what that result might be, or set a goal as to what it is you want the result to be?
And I think in this era of fake news, deep fakes, all the rest of it, I think integrity of our research and promotion and advocacy of our research through this impact lens is something that, like, really, it's so important. And you know, everyone wants to have a positive impact, or at least stop a negative impact from occurring. I think we're all a little bit altruistic in some way, shape, or form. So why wouldn't you talk about it? Why wouldn't you want to evaluate it? Yeah, think of the counterfactual. Without it, where would we be?
I think kind of being an impact specialist within like the research management community is such a privileged place to be. You know, I was talking to someone recently about how, you know, the world can be quite a depressing place sometimes, but I just feel so optimistic every time I step onto campus and look at the amazing work that our researchers are doing. So to have the opportunity to be even just a tiny part in helping them achieve the impact that they want to achieve is just amazing. It makes me so much more positive about the world and our ability to tackle all these, you know, horrific challenges that we have. You know, I don't need to go into too much detail about them. We all know what they are. But we all know some amazing researchers who are actually really making a difference. Like, research impact is like the most important thing for me.
Thanks, Faith. We have a question for Lia specifically, which is from Ian Spark. And he asks, what are the 4 problem-solving questions? Was that something you shared in your presentation, Lia?
No. I guess I was just talking about wicked problems that we have as a that humanity faces. You can pick a multitude of them, I'm sure, as Faith just mentioned. But yeah, any question, usually you can take a number of different perspectives on. So maybe that's kind of answering Ian's question, unless you had something more specific. No, it might have been me speaking more generally.
Ian, if you want to follow up with a question, do. I've got a couple of questions here which relate a bit to the Epigeium research impact modules that there are. And I'm not sure if the speakers here today can help, but are you using the Epigeium research impact module at your universities? If so, how is engagement with the online modules, and has anything worked to increase engagement? So I know the speakers, Tamika was involved in as a lead advisor. Faith was an author on that program, but I have a follow-up from Annie Liu, who's from the University of New South Wales, and it's a comment rather than a question. She says, regarding training, we take a high-touch engagement approach. In addition to pitching the benefits of the training for researchers, we always follow up and check in with them at the start, midway, and post-training. The researchers appreciate the check-ins because they know someone cares about their development and progress. And just for that, it was Jen Beaudry from Flinders Uni who asked about research impact, and I know that University of New South Wales do have the course, so I can probably put you two in touch, Jen and Annie, if you want to ask. But does anybody have any comments on I guess it goes back to that engagement. Has anything worked to increase engagement? But we spoke about that one earlier. Anything that you'd like to add?
I just think it probably also brings us back to that conversation around drivers, right? Because the whole time I've worked in this field, like, those drivers are constantly changing. We always kind of talk about how impact is becoming more and more of a thing that people are talking about. It's certainly not something that's going away. So, the drivers are constantly changing, and then there are more things to hang off. Why our researchers might want to think about doing some training in research impact, thinking about how to plan it into their research, thinking about how to communicate it better, thinking about how to evidence it better. So, it brings us back to that drivers piece that we all talked to at the beginning. So yeah, there's always more reasons to hook our research community on. But I can't remember who it was that I think said this earlier about really focusing on the positive parts, like why it might improve people's research, not they have to do it because a funder's asking them, or they have to do it because they need to produce an impact case study. It's actually, how is it going to benefit them as a researcher? How is it going to improve the quality of their research? How is it going to improve the likelihood of them making a difference that they want to make, and having that positive focus.
Thanks, Faith. Liam, I got a quick comment from Anais at Auckland University of Technology. She says they start to increase engagement by embedding training within existing faculty and school research staff meetings. This allows us to find staff where they are without adding another time demand to their schedule, and also enables us to customize content to particular disciplines by including speakers from within those disciplines. So they kind of sneak it into things that they already have to go to, if I understand correctly. Lots of nodding going on here. Anyone want to say anything about that?
That's that's a great thing. I always say that, and even with translating research, it's find your audience where they already are. Who has your audience? Where are they hanging out? Find them there. It's opportunistic. I think that's great. It's really good to see that's happening. The other thing I'll say, just on engagement with any tool, and I'm sure Julie can speak about this with Overton as well, and that is an amazing tool, just backing that comment up. But just with any tool, with any training that is online, any toolkit you build, you can't just kind of go, right, we've bought it, it's available, off you go. It doesn't work like that, because we've all bought something, haven't we, that's on the shelf that we've gone, oh, damn it, I never finished that course, or I never went back to that. And I see this happen all the time. You really do have to surround it with a strategy around how you're going to embed it. So, and I reckon Lia can probably even speak to this around, I think they use Impact Tracker, because, putting things in and expecting people to use it, is just not going to happen. So what can you put around it to incentivize it, to make it easier for it to be an add-on? And also from a sales perspective, we know that it takes 6 touch points before someone actually says yes to doing something. So, and sometimes up to 12. So just because you put out one flyer saying, hey, we've got this online tool, you should do it, doesn't mean anyone's going to do it. It might take them up to 12 times of seeing that, or for some people who've gone through it to be raving about it, for them to finally go, I'll do it. So I would just really highlight, again, it comes back to how are you positioning your offering as a whole, as a strategy, rather than just the strategy is we will buy it and we will put it in the library and we'll advertise it once.
And that, I just want to reiterate that touch point that Tamika brought up. That is critical in my view. Having champions out there that support whatever it is, if it's your roadmap, if it's your tool, your education training, it's imperative, because researchers talk to each other. They say, this is useful. No, it's not useful. Don't do this instead. And that word of mouth will trump anything else that you try and put on paper, try and put online. So make sure that you are getting to the right people that have the wider network that you're trying to achieve.
Sounds a lot like you need to make a big impact about research impact in order to get people thinking about research impact. So it all goes back to kind of that impact thing.
And it's that value add I'd like to add as well, is that if they see, like, it's a virtuous cycle that you create. If they see a reward coming through by doing an impact summary from your training, and then it goes into, an internal grant. If it has multiple uses, then they see a time saving there automatically. So yeah, really building your training around also multiple touch points as well. Where else can they use it? Making it a value add.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions. We've only got 5 minutes to go, but I really want to squeeze them in. And I'm just taking one that is about Southeast Asia. So from Rebecca Lavini, she asks, you've mentioned there's partnerships with Southeast Asia institutions. Can you share some success stories or challenges to promote the uni's research impact initiatives or projects? Anything about, because we do have people on the call joining us from Southeast Asia. So is there any perspective that you can share from that point of view?
I can have a quick go at this one. I know for us, what's challenging most is actually access to information as to who are those researchers, and where are they at. So it's just as simple as that. Also, are they working in a discipline that we have a strength in and that we can support them and create linkages with, or and is there a way that we can fund a collaborative approach? So those are the barriers. It tends to be around money, access to information, and sharing, just like even sharing platforms, collaboration tools. So they're the problems. How we address them really is a lot of legwork, a lot of conversations. I don't think I have a silver bullet for that one.
Thanks, Lia. And then we got another question from Annie from UNSW. She says, given impact's important in almost every aspect of research, she wants to know how you pitch it to researchers or clients so they understand what it is and its importance and embed it in their work and research. Anything to add to that for that one?
I'll just say quickly that they already mostly have impact. It's just a matter of gathering the evidence, planning and identifying when that arises. I think all research, like it's been said before, all researchers have it. Are they thinking about accessible impact, or are they just thinking about the impact of their research as well? So, who's the audience they're wanting to talk to about their research? So, how do I don't know. There's lots to kind of to think about when you're talking about impact with a researcher. Meet them where they're at, like Tamika said. Take an opportunistic view.
And I guess last question will be creating a culture that will enable impact. So what are the critical elements that you need? It has to be in about 30 seconds, about contributing to that culture of impact enabling and of an impact enabling environment. Anyone, what are the critical sort of elements you would highlight?
Yeah, I think it's a culture change journey is very slow. You have to have a lot of patience. I think the first thing is really about embedding a shared understanding. So that's why we kind of started at the point of really extensive consultation with our academic community, understanding their concerns about having an impact and engagement strategy and being able to kind of mitigate any of those concerns. Really having that shared understanding of what impact is, what it means to the institution, really focusing on a bottom-up approach of that development of that impact and engagement. Then looking at all the drivers within the institution that reward or recognise our researchers and impact. What is preventing them? How can we empower them? How can we also not put everything on the researchers themselves when time is such an enormous limitation? As you can imagine, I'm sure that during the consultation period, we spent a lot of time focusing on what the barriers were, because that's what the culture change piece was. How do we slowly remove those barriers to being able to do this?
Fantastic.
And then, how do we build up all those incentives? So yeah, it's a long piece of work. We launched our impact and engagement framework 5 years ago, and there's a great tool that we've used that looks at how we've changed our environment, and we're still only partway along our journey in 5 years.
Thanks so much, Faith. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm really sorry that that's all we have time for today. So it's a big thank you to Tamika, Julie, Faith and Lia for your presentations, for the insightful discussion. And thanks also to my colleague Sumitra, who's been behind the scenes today running the presentation and ensuring this runs smoothly. So we will make the recording of the webinar available and circulate it shortly. And I hope everyone here today has enjoyed the discussion. And we look forward to you joining future webinars. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a lovely day. Thank you.